Hi everyone, this is Michael Strahan, and no, I don't play football for the New York Giants, but I do own a website called OutdoorsDirectory.com. We're the largest website on the internet focused on the Alaska outdoors. Our main purpose is providing information about the Alaska outdoors, and we have a number of ways that we do that on our website. One of those ways are podcasts like this one. Now, most of the time when people come to Alaska to visit, they spend their time in the Anchorage area or the Mat-Su Valley. They possibly will go out on the Kenai Peninsula or maybe take the railroad up to Denali Park or to Fairbanks or possibly explore the Denali Highway. There's a number of different ways to explore Alaska. But one idea that may not have occurred to you is to just jump on an airplane and head over to Kodiak Island. And you can do that just for a weekend. You can spend a day down there. You can spend a week down there like we did last summer with my friend Tom. So we're going to talk about Kodiak Island for a little bit here, and I think you'll see some intriguing ideas here that you might be able to use when you're putting your next vacation together. And we'll start off with a brief description of Kodiak and what you can expect down there, and then we'll take you through our trip day by day. We'll show you some slides and some video from the time that we had down there, and I think you'll see some things of interest. This is the Kodiak Airport. And the Kodiak Airport is served by commercial jet service and also turboprop service out of Anchorage. In order to get to Kodiak, you have to come from Anchorage if you're going to fly there, as a general rule. The Kodiak Airport has cargo facilities and passenger facilities. It's also connected to the Coast Guard base, which you can see in the distance on this picture. So when you get to the Kodiak Airport, there's a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, they do have rental cars available, and they have cab service into Kodiak City itself. Kodiak City is too far from the airport to walk reasonably, so you're either going to have to hire a cab or rent a car. In some cases, if you're just doing a day trip with a local charter service, they will pick you up at the airport, and then you won't have to worry about the vehicle situation at all. Now, another idea would be if you came down there just for the day and you wanted to wander around Kodiak for a little bit and maybe do some fishing. If you notice in this picture, kind of in the foreground on our side of the runway, there's a river coming into the ocean right there. That's the outlet of the Buskin River. The Buskin River gets a really healthy run of sockeye salmon every summer, and it's conceivable that you could walk there from the airport. You just go around the end of the runway and go right to the bridge and then walk right down to the river. And it's possible that you could take your family down there and have a great time fishing on the Buskin River. So that would be one possible way to do a day trip on Kodiak Island relatively inexpensively. Another way to get to Kodiak is on the Marine Highway system, and this is the ferry Tustumena. There's a number of different ferries in the Marine Highway system. The departure points are out of Valdez, Whittier, Seward, and Homer. I don't recommend that you take any other route than the Homer to Kodiak route, and the reason for that is because it takes a long time to get there from, say, Whittier. You're looking at a minimum of 13 hours if it's just a straight through trip. However, if you go out of Homer, it's a 9.5-hour run. They have staterooms on the ferry, so you can rent a room if you'd like. They also have the ability to accommodate vehicles and trailers. So if you have a camper on a pickup, or you have a van, or you're pulling a boat behind your vehicle, you can bring that with you to Kodiak Island. Now, if you're going to go down there for a week, it might be a great idea to take the ferry, and then you've got a vehicle, so you don't have to rent a vehicle in Kodiak. If you've got a camper, you don't have to stay in a hotel, and if you've got a boat, you don't have to go out on a charter. So you can actually save yourself a lot of money. It might be worthwhile to run the numbers on the cost of hauling a full-size vehicle and a boat on a trailer compared to what it would cost you to use commercial services while you're on the island. But there can be a lot of benefits to going down there totally self-contained like that. So the ferry would be another option for you. This is a picture of Kodiak Island that was taken from right behind Kodiak City on our trip, and you can see the weather was just beautiful down there. I would not expect weather like this. Typically you get a lot of rain and wind down there, but you do get some really nice days like this, and this is what keeps people coming back to Kodiak Island. Kodiak Island is the largest island in Alaska. It's over 5,300 square miles. It's just huge. The majority of the island is not accessible from the road system, however, so if you want to go visit the more remote areas of Kodiak, you're going to have to go out by bush plane. There are commuter aircraft that come out of Kodiak City out to remote villages like Larsen Bay or Akiak or over to Old Harbor and so on. So you could fly commercially out to one of those places and then do whatever you're there to do once you get there. Of course, you could also take a boat, and there's a number of services that take boats to different areas around the island, so that would be another possibility. However, on this video, we're going to stay focused on the road system, and so we're going to jump into some different aspects of that. Right up behind the town of Kodiak, there are 3 wind turbines up on the hill, and if you get a chance to drive up there, it's pretty breathtaking. The view is amazing from up there, and these windmills are huge. I've never seen anything like them before. They're 280 feet tall, and they generate 20% of the electrical power for the entire city of Kodiak. These pictures don't really do them justice. The blades on these turbines are huge, and it's pretty impressive to stand there and watch those things turning around generating electrical power. But that's a pretty interesting little backdrop behind Kodiak City itself. Here's a look at one of the entrances to the harbor area, and on the left side is Kodiak Island itself with the beginnings of the boat harbor there and some of the commercial facilities that cater to the commercial fishing fleet. And then on the right, in the foreground here, you can see kind of a little corner of Near Island. And so this channel between Near Island and Kodiak Island is bridged, and I'm standing on the bridge taking this picture here. And you can see some of the commercial fishing boats coming in. At the time we were there, they were fishing for pink salmon, but when we were fishing, we were actually going for silvers and kings, and the run was pretty good, so we did really well on the fishing down there. This is another shot showing the 2 harbors that are in the Kodiak City area. One of them is in the distance there on Near Island, and you can see there's a breakwater at the far right, and then a narrow entrance to the harbor to the left there. So it's a pretty protected harbor, so even if the wind's blowing, it's nice and sheltered in there. And then the other harbor is in the foreground on the far left. Before you get to the bridge, you can see the boat harbor there. I've chartered out of both of those harbors before, and there's a number of good operators down there that do a really good job with their charter services down there. On this particular trip, we ended up going with Ultimate Island Adventures, a guy named Sean Gornall, and we'll have his contact information available at the end of this broadcast. But he did a great job for us, and we had a wonderful time down there. We booked him for 3 days. The first 2 days were saltwater fishing, and the third day was an ATV excursion over to the other side of the island where we fished for sockeye salmon. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is a good overview of the area down by the waterfront. Here we've zoomed in on the waterfront area itself, and I really enjoy walking around waterfront areas. There's a lot to do and a lot to see, and it's just pretty fascinating. So Kodiak Island's waterfront area is no exception to that. One of the things a lot of people like to do in a waterfront area is look for a good restaurant, and we tried to sample as many of the restaurants that we could while we were there. Of course, they have a lot of fast food down there, McDonald's and those kind of places as well. So if you're on a tight budget and you're trying to keep the costs low, you might want to look at those. In most cases, though, those places were far enough away from the waterfront that you would probably have to get a cab or rent a vehicle. Of course, if you brought your own vehicle, then it's a non-issue. But all that's available in the Kodiak area. Some of the restaurants that we checked out that you might want to take a look at, though, one of them you can see under the bridge in the distance over there to the left where that red roof is. We ended up dining out at the Old Powerhouse restaurant a couple of times. It was really good. We came back. They specialize in seafood. They also have a really robust sushi menu, and they have tables that look right on that narrow neck of water that connects, that comes right through there under the bridge where Near Island is. And so it's a really nice view. You can watch the boats coming in and out, and really great way to spend the evening. Another nice restaurant that you might want to check out is the Chart Room, and that's actually in the Best Western Hotel. They specialize in seafood, and they have other dishes there as well, and they're a little bit on the pricey side, but we found that the food was pretty decent there as well. And then just normal bar type food, you could go to Henry's. They're down by the waterfront, and we ate there a few times as well. And you're going to get things like burgers and fish sandwiches, that sort of thing at Henry's. We never had any we didn't have a bad meal there at Henry's. So that'd be a great place to grab lunch if you're wandering around the waterfront area. And then another one that's a little bit farther away from the waterfront, you'd probably have to take a cab or drive there, is the King's Diner. And we went to King's Diner for breakfast. It's about what you would expect in a normal traditional diner. They've got really good breakfast menus, and then great place for burgers and fries and that sort of fare. So King's Diner would be another one to check out. Here's some shots from the waterfront area, and what I like about Kodiak's waterfront area is it's fairly compact and everything is within walking distance. So a number of the restaurants that I mentioned earlier, you could walk there from right here where we're taking this picture, and you could also walk to your hotel. So everything's right there. You don't really have to rent a car when you go down there if you're chartering out of the main waterfront area. Kodiak also has a really large Coast Guard station, and in fact it's the largest one in the Pacific region. They're responsible for over 4 million square miles of waterways outside the Kodiak area. They do the entire Gulf of Alaska, the Bristol Bay area, the Bering Sea, clear over to Russia, and then along the Pacific coast portions of Alaska as well. So they've got a very large patrol area. They've got cutters based right here in Kodiak Harbor, and they also have C-130 aircraft and helicopters as well that they use for search and rescue and also for surveillance work and that sort of thing. If you ever saw the movie The Guardian, you probably remember the Kodiak station because they were featured heavily in that movie as well. So anyway, that's the Coast Guard station, and you can't miss it. There's plenty of opportunities for lodging around Kodiak within walking distance of the waterfront. There's bed and breakfasts that you can stay at, which are really nice. We ended up just staying at some hotels that were a little bit more inexpensive. All we wanted was just a roof over our head and a clean bed. But there are some higher end, more upscale restaurants or lodging as well. But there's a lot of options there for lodging in Kodiak. This is Mac's Sport Shop. A lot of guys, when they come out to go fishing, they want to pick up some extra items, or maybe you forgot something at home and so you need to pick it up locally. It's all there in Kodiak. You really don't need to bring too much with you if you have the budget to purchase your own fishing tackle and so on. A lot of guys that they go halibut fishing, they like to pick up octopus because it stays on the hook really well, as opposed to herring, which can fall off and you're constantly reeling up to check your bait. So you can pick that up at either Size or at Mac's. They have all that stuff, and of course all the local tackle that's used on Kodiak Island, you can find it in these stores. I'm not going to go into a detailed list of all of the terminal gear that you're going to need if you're fishing the Kodiak road system. I'll just tell you right now, kind of the easiest way to do that would be to pick up a copy of Renee Lemire and Gunnar Peterson's book Alaska Fishing. And we have that in the bookstore on outdoorsdirectory.com. So go to our store and just type in Alaska Fishing. That book will come right up and you can order it right from our store. They have a very detailed description of the road system fisheries on Kodiak Island, including the lakes. And we're not going to talk about those on this video, but we will cover some of the roadside streams and that sort of thing. But for details on what kind of tackle you need, what kind of rods, everything, including fly fishing equipment, that's all going to be in Alaska Fishing, so you'll want to grab that definitely. This is what we were really after, so we're going to get into that right now. Alright, on day one, our captain, Sean Gornell, came out and picked us up at the airport, and we just stashed our luggage in his truck, and he had the boat already gassed up. We had the bait on board. Everything was ready to go, so we just jumped in and headed right out to the fishing grounds. And I was really impressed by that. I've done a lot of fishing out of Seward and out of Homer, and you typically have a long boat ride in both of those locations to get out to good fishing. But in Kodiak, you're fishing within 20 minutes of the harbor. In fact, if you're catching your own bait, you're fishing in the harbor. They have an outfall from the fish processing plants right there in the harbor, and there's a giant school of herring that come in there to feed on that fish waste. And if you take a small lightweight trout rod with some of those small herring sabiki jigs and a weight on the end, you're jigging for herring right there. You pull up 5 at a time, and these are the really big herring. They're 10 to 12 inches long. So if you have kids with you, it'd be a great time just to run over there and catch some herring for bait. And then you've got some really nice fresh bait that you can troll with, or you can use to fish for rockfish or halibut. Anyway, we went straight out to the fishing grounds. There was a big fog bank out there, but we were able to see some boats on the radar, so we kind of slowed it down in there, got down to trolling speed, and there was a little trolling pattern going on out there. So we got in the conga line and made a few loops through there. We picked up some kings, also some silvers out there, and we did get a couple of pinks, if I remember correctly. We caught pinks just about every day we went out on the salt. So anyway, we hung out there for a while. And then we made a dash for this little inlet between Spruce Island and Kodiak Island itself. There's a little passage in there. We didn't just go straight over there and anchor, though. We stopped in a few places on the way in and prospected for lingcod and rockfish and did quite well. And then we ended up going in and anchoring up for halibut, and we caught a fairly nice halibut there, and we limited out on halibut that day, but the big one I think for the day was just under 80 pounds. And you'll see a picture of that here on the video. So we kind of wrapped it up there and then headed right back into the harbor. This is our first day on the water with Captain Sean, and that's my partner Tom on the left there talking to Captain Sean, and kind of getting the lowdown on what we're going to be doing that day and what we could expect and so on. The boat's really comfortable. It's got a heated cabin on it with a door that closes in the back, so if the weather's cold and rainy you can be inside and protected, but you can still watch out the back window to see if a fish is hitting your rod on the downrigger, and you can just jump right out and grab it. So nice heated cabin, very comfortable. V-berth up in the front, so if somebody needs to take a nap or what have you, and you've definitely got storage for your stuff in there. And here's Captain Sean back here rigging up some bait for us while we're trolling for kings. And of course there's Tom with the first king that we boated, and I've not heard the end of that since. There's a pretty nice king. They do get kings in that area up to 50 pounds. In fact, I was talking to one of the skippers down there just today, and right now it's June 1st as I'm recording this. We were down there about this time last year, if I remember correctly. No, it was a little bit later. But at any rate, one of the skippers I talked to today said that last week they caught 2 that weighed 50 pounds down there. So they get some really nice kings down there, and this was a good average size fish for down there. And of course Tom's got a big smile on his face because he caught the first one, and as it turned out, the biggest one for that day. I like to take pictures of the way people rig up. There's some local differences in the way people rig up in different parts of the state for saltwater fishing, and this isn't all that much different from what you'll see in south central Alaska, but here we've got a little trailer hook with a circle hook on it and a little hoochie on there with some bait on the end to give it a little bit of scent. But the real thing I want to draw your attention to is that jig. That's a really large scampy jig with a giant rubber tail on it. What you get on some of those jigs is the fish will tear that tail off after a while. You'll get short strikers and they'll rip that rubber tail off. Then you have to throw the rest of the jig away and replace it. So these real heavy duty ones, they've got really good action and they hold up for a lot of fish. But especially I want to focus on the color. I really don't prefer the red, the orange, and the yellow jigs because when you get down below 30 feet, those colors all disappear. They basically turn gray. But white holds its color at quite a distance from the surface, so it's always going to work no matter how deep you're fishing. So I usually go for the white jig. If you're going on a charter boat, I recommend that you grab the rod with the white jig on it. And here's Tom with our first lingcod, and we ended up tossing this guy back over the side, but we did keep a number of lingcod for the freezer. And this was the first one that we got. You'll notice the color on that fish. It's fairly lightweight or light colored, and lingcod can adapt their color pattern to, and actually the color variation to the color of the bottom where they are. So this guy was obviously in the kelp, but then you look at this one, it's considerably darker, and its tail's kind of dragged off too. This was an old spawner. Spawning season is over by the time we're down there, by the way. They typically spawn in the spring. And so the Department of Fish and Game will, in order to protect these big ling cod, they don't allow us to fish for them early in the season, because these guys will spawn, and then the males will guard the eggs until they hatch, and then they'll swim off. But before those eggs hatch, if that male disappears off the nest, which they are very aggressive when they're guarding their nest, if you're fishing in that area, you're going to pull that guy right off the nest, and you've just doomed all those ling cod fry. So because as soon as that fish is gone, they'll come in and gobble them all up. So that's why his tail's dragged off. He's been in there protecting his territory earlier in the season. But you can see the color of this fish. Obviously he's in the rocks, and that other one was more in a kelp type of area. And this is another lighter colored fish. This is a screenshot off of a GoPro camera. We took the GoPro and shoved it down in the water on a 12-foot aluminum pole and got some great footage, which we'll show you on the video here. But this one ended up in the fish box, fairly good sized ling, and this is about what you can expect down there on Kodiak. Another fish that we were specifically targeting was Pacific cod, or as locally they're called pea cod. The commercial fishing fleet will target these fish as well, and if you go to Skipper's or any of the places that serve fish fillet sandwiches and that sort of thing, probably you're eating Pacific cod. But it's a really good fish to eat, and so we wanted to load up on these guys. I've caught cod down in Cook Inlet before, but most of the ones that we got out of Homer, especially the larger ones, the meat was really wormy. They pick up an intestinal parasite, and after you kill the fish, that parasite will migrate out of the digestive tract area out into the meat. So on Kodiak Island, that was not the case at all. These fish were totally clean, no worms whatsoever. And so we really loaded up on the cod down there. I've been wanting to get a freezer full of cod, and we sure did that on this trip. And here's Tom bragging again about his big ling cod. This was another one that we caught that ended up in the fish box. You can see the ling cod fishing was quite good, and we spent a lot of time targeting these guys. They're just a lot of fun to catch. And now we're heading back into the harbor. This is a commercial fishing boat. You can see he's got the jitney tied up on the back end there. That's what they use to deploy the net, which is on the stern there. And these guys were out fishing for pinks. They're coming in for a resupply. And here's a little sport fishing boat that we saw out there trolling for kings. We saw a number of these guys out there, and they're heading back into the harbor about the same time we were. The Kodiak harbor area is fairly laid back compared to the ones in south central Alaska. I've been in a lot of harbors around Alaska, and the ones down in Homer and Seward are usually a beehive of activity. A lot of people walking around and just a lot of things going on. But Kodiak was pretty laid back. Here is Sean waiting in the boat for our fish to get offloaded, and I'll explain that here just coming up. This is a fish tote. We threw all of our fish into this tote, and there's a commercial processing company that handled it from there, and we'll talk about that just in a second. But you can see we've got some kings in there, definitely some Pacific cod, a lot of black rockfish, some fairly large ones, by the way, and then halibut. So we did really well. It was a good mixed bag trip, and that's exactly what we were after each day we were down there. And here's Tom with the catch of the day. This halibut was between 75 and 80 pounds, if I remember correctly. If they get much bigger than that, or say above 100 pounds, you're pretty much looking at a female, and those would be the ones that we would definitely want to release. The females are the brood stock, and so we want to make sure that we take care of our halibut fishery for years to come. So we'll let those larger fish go. The flesh on the larger females is pretty coarse anyway, so it's not as desirable on the table as the smaller fish are. So we go for the fish that are under 100 pounds, and just about perfect for what we're looking for. And of course, by Tom's expression, it was just about perfect for him because his was bigger than mine. Alright, we used Kodiak smoking and custom processing when we were down there to take care of our fish. You can process your own fish, certainly, and I've done that many times, but it was really nice for a change just to hand that all off to somebody that knew what they were doing, and we didn't have to mess with it. So you can see the crane operator up there to the left, and our fish tote is swinging on the end of the boom up there at the top right of the picture. And what they did was they came down with a check-off sheet, and we checked off all of the fish that we had, how much weight we had. They weighed it up right there for us, and then what we wanted done with it. And in our case, we wanted it all chunked up into 1 pound pieces, so portion size meals. And I like the 1 pound packages because no matter how many people are coming over for dinner, you can just pull out however many you're going to need for that meal, instead of ending up taking out too much fish and then something goes bad in the refrigerator. So we had it all packed up, and what these guys did is they cut it up and they vacuum packed it in commercial grade vacuum pack bags, and then flash froze it for us, boxed it up in waxed fish boxes and banded it. And then at the end of the trip, all we had to do when we headed to the airport was swing by and grab the fish boxes, settle up with those guys, and we were out of there. They were very careful to pack our fish boxes so that they were within the weight limit of the airlines, which in this case was 50 pounds, nothing over 50 pounds. So they did a great job for that. And we ended up with more than 100 pounds of fish each. And so we ended up air freighting some of it back, but it worked out just great. It was exactly what we were looking for, and we didn't have to mess with it at all. You come into the dock, they take the fish from there, and you don't see it till you leave for home. Okay, day 2 was our second day with Captain Strahan with Ultimate Island Adventures, and we gassed up the boat that morning and we headed right back out where we went the day before, and we got back in the conga line to troll for some kings. We did catch a few kings that day, and also some silvers and probably a pink or two, which we released. And then after we got tired of that, we were out there again in the fog bank, and then we headed back into the same general area by Spruce Island where we were fishing the day before. Jigged up some rockfish and lingcod in there, and then went out and anchored in the entrance to this other bay for halibut for a little while. And then we headed into the narrows between Whale Island and Kodiak Island, and that little narrows in there, that water gets ripping through there. So if you bring your own boat out, I would not recommend going out there unless you're really aware of what's going on with the tide. We saw standing waves out there that were just huge. It looked like a river coming through that passage. So you want to be really cautious when you get into that narrows out there by Whale Island. So we anchored up out there for a while. We got into a massive school of Pacific cod. There were so many that it looked like a giant cloud right under the boat. There must have been, I don't know how many thousand fish down there, but it was phenomenal. And so we caught all we could handle. And then at that point we headed back in to the harbor, had our fish picked up by the processor right there at the dock, and we went up to the hotel, got cleaned up, and went out and had a nice bite to eat. Okay, this was our second day on the Beulah May with Sean Gornall, Captain Sean with Ultimate Island Adventures. And this is just a good shot of the boat. It's a silver streak. I can't remember the length, but you could easily fish 6 people off this boat. Tom and I booked the whole thing, so we just had the 2 of us on there with Captain Sean, and his wife came with us a couple times. Had a great time out there, just amazing. This is another shot of the boat from back in the back deck area, and you can see the cabin just closes up nice and tight, so if you have a cold day you can get in there with the heater going and you'll be nice and comfortable. He's got a clean water or freshwater washdown right there, and so if any blood gets in the back end from the fish and whatnot, you can just hose it down, you can wash your hands, whatever. And he's got some soapy water there so you can stay clean during the day. This was kind of a funny story. I set the GoPro camera up on the back of the boat so we could film the back of the boat while we were trolling for kings. And I just got the camera set up. Tom and I walked back by the downriggers and both rods got bit at the same time. So we landed those 2 fish, and Tom's got the bigger smile because his was bigger, of course. But these are a couple of silvers. The one on the left that Tom's holding is about what you can expect on the average, especially during the early part of the season. A little bit later you're going to get some larger fish up to 15 pounds and even larger than that. But Kodiak does put out some really nice silvers, and so that's about what you can expect down there. This was a smaller feeder king that we picked up, and we did catch about 4 or 5 white kings while we were down there. And my understanding of a white king is they're just not able to metabolize keratin. I think that's what the issue is. And so the meat doesn't turn pink like it normally would. But they taste the same, and this guy ended up on the grill, and I can verify personally that there's nothing wrong at all with a white king. This was a pink that we were releasing, and we caught a number of pinks, but we didn't keep any of them. Nothing wrong with pinks, but when you've got kings and silvers on tap, you can afford to be a little bit choosy. The commercial fishermen target these pinks, and so if you're from outside Alaska and you've ever had canned salmon, I guarantee about 90% of it was pink salmon. So that's what you're looking at right there. They're definitely good eating, but if you've got a 6-pound pink versus a 12 or a 15-pound silver, it's kind of a no-brainer which one you're going to keep. And this is the back end of the boat here. You can see we've got our downriggers there, and we're just kind of getting ready to set up for trolling. He's got twin Honda 200s on the back there, so this boat really gets up and scoots when it needs to, and when you've got flat enough water to do that, and here we clearly do. You might be able to barely see off the stern a little bit to the right. There's another boat back there in the shadows of the fog, kind of in there in the conga line, trolling for kings. I don't know what it is about these foggy days, but I really enjoy trolling in the fog like this. It just adds another dimension to it. And so anyway, we had a great time doing that. Here we're busting out of the fog, and we're heading out to look for halibut. And Tom ended up pulling up this little octopus, which we let go. It was hooked through one of the suckers, I think, and it just tore loose right by the boat, but we weren't going to keep it anyway. A lot of guys will keep these because they make really good halibut bait. It stays on your hook for a long time, and instead of reeling up and changing your bait or checking your bait every 5 minutes with herring, you can leave that octopus on there and there'll be something for him to chew on. It's also really good to eat, and you can chunk that up and make poke out of it, or you can use it for sashimi. It's really good for a lot of things. So if you have a Hawaiian friend, ask him about taco and he'll tell you what to do with it. This is Captain Sean with a little lingcod that we released. He was a great guy to fish with. One of my favorite charter operators. And so just had a great time with him, and we're hoping that he'll be doing this stuff for a long time to come. If you go down there and fish with him, tell him we sent you. And here we are with a typical size black rockfish down there. We were catching these on crippled herring jigs, but I think just about anything you throw in the water is going to catch rockfish. I kind of like that crippled herring, the action of it. It kind of flutters when it drops. You got to be careful when you drop that jig because they'll hit it on the drop too. So you kind of let it down, but let it flutter a little bit as it's dropping. And then as soon as you pick it up, you'll probably have a fish on there. We could barely get that jig to the bottom. We'd have a fish on it every time. So it was pretty amazing. So we kind of picked through our rockfish to pick out the big ones. And a fish about this size, you're probably going to have to chunk each fillet up into 3 pieces. So you'll have portion-sized pieces. Otherwise, it's just too much for one meal unless you're feeding a group of people. Here's a kelp greenling that we picked up. We have 2 different kinds of greenling in Alaska. We've got a rock greenling that I've caught out on Kodiak Island, and they're out on the Aleutians, of course. But this is a kelp greenling, and they're really good to eat. The meat is really fine textured. In fact, some people call them sea trout because the meat is very similar to a rainbow trout in its texture. But they're really good to eat. So you might want to think about something like that if you pick up some greenling. This is a dusky rockfish. We threw this guy back. We were targeting the black rockfish, but there's a number of different rockfish species that can be had off Kodiak Island. We did catch a number of yelloweye, but we released all those. Sometimes the yelloweye, especially if you're fishing deeper, the swim bladder will expand and it'll push their stomach out of their mouth, and if you can't find a way to release that gas out of there or reduce the size of it somehow, that fish is going to die. Even if it swims down immediately, it's going to pop up about 100 yards behind the boat somewhere down current, and the seagulls are going to peck its eyes out and eat it up while it's floating along. So the best way to release those is to use a quick release system, and there's a number of different ways to do it. We have that outlined in our saltwater fishing pages on outdoorsdirectory.com. There's a quick release device that we've got diagrammed on there for you, and I recommend with the yelloweye, if you're going to release them, that you lower them back down to depth. At least get them down past 33 feet because the swim bladder will be about half that size at 33 feet, and they may be able to swim down to the bottom at that point. Of course, if you can let them all the way down, so much the better. But those yelloweye, they live a long time. A mature yelloweye could be 75 years old. So, and they stay on the same reef for most of their lifetime. So it's really easy to go in and target these fish. You can wipe out a whole rock pile in a few fishing trips, and there won't be any yelloweye in there for years. So we usually release our yelloweye. And here's Tom bragging about his lingcod again. There was another nice one that he picked up the second day we were out. And this was a really nice peacod that we picked up out there in that big school that we talked about earlier. We just got into thousands of pea cod, and we loaded up on those. And here we are just making another relocation, taking a peek in the fish box. You can see we've got a couple of lings in there, a king salmon, and 2 or 3 silvers, and some black rockfish. That wasn't by any means a day's catch. That was just kind of part way through the day while we were moving around. I just popped the lid and took a picture. And these are the downrigger setups he's got there. You can see he's set up to troll 2 rods on the same downrigger, and then there's another rod holder on the back rail, so you could run 2 rods on each downrigger and then 1 flat line off the rail in the back on each side. So if you wanted to run a couple of shallower lines while you were trolling for kings, maybe put a banana sinker and a flasher behind it, and then run a couple of other lines deeper off of each downrigger. You could sort of prospect for your depth and find out where the kings are running, and then set everything up for that depth. Alright, we're heading back into the harbor now, and so we're just on our way back in through the Narrows, heading back into Kodiak Harbor. Here's another commercial fishing boat. You can see he's got his gill net all piled up on the back there, and he's coming back in for supplies. Day 3 was a lot of fun. Did something I haven't done before, and Sean also runs a little ATV operation, and again the name of his company is Kodiak Island, or Ultimate Island Adventures, I'm sorry, and we'll have his contact information on the back end of the show here so you can check it out. But he's got these ATVs, and there's a dirt road that connects to the main highway system just outside of Kodiak, and so we drove down there, parked at his area, and jumped on the ATVs and headed over to Saltwater River where we were fishing for sockeye, and we'll look at some pictures on that here in a minute. Okay, here's Captain Sean taking the lead on our little ATV trip over to Saltwater River, and the ride over there is about 2 hours. So I kept my rain gear handy. It was overcast that day and we didn't know if it was going to rain, but I told Tom chances are if we don't get our rain gear out now we're going to get soaked. So we dug the rain gear out and we ended up wearing it on the way over. It did rain a little bit. And then finally we got over here to Saltwater River, and here we are unloading our rods and stuff like that. Sean does provide rods and terminal gear, but I like to use my own stuff on the rivers, so we brought our own, and you can see those rod cases on the back of that one ATV. That's our stuff. We're getting ready to rig up to fish for reds. And this is a pool right at the place where the ATV trail comes to the river. And if you look in the middle of the picture, you can see kind of a grayish area there. That's actually a school of sockeye sitting there, and there's some more just downstream of them. And then if you come this way from the sockeye and slightly upstream, right where that shallow water starts to break off into deeper water, you'll see some other fish there that are smaller. That's actually a small school of Arctic char, or Dolly Varden, and they're pretty close to the same fish. But that river had more dollies in it than I've ever seen in a river before. It was amazing. You'd come into a pool and there'd be 50 or 60 dollies just carpeting the bottom of that thing. They follow the reds up, and when the reds spawn, they just dive on those eggs. So they know those reds are coming up to spawn, and they'll follow them up out of the ocean, and they'll be right there in the river. So we never really were targeting the dollies, so we weren't geared up for it. I didn't really, I guess, expect that, and so I didn't bring any lightweight stuff. I was just set up to fish for reds, but I think if I go back there, I'll bring a fly rod and try to take on those dollies. I'll bet if you put a small glow bug on there, you'll catch all the dollies you want. And here I am picking on a school of reds that's coming through. There were a lot of fresh reds coming up the Saltwater River there. That was one buck that Tom caught, and they were all just that bright. The fish were in amazing shape. And here's another. This is a hen that we caught, and we just bled her out, bonked her and bled her, and we're getting ready to toss her in the cooler. We did have some company on the river, and of course on Kodiak Island you expect to run into bears just about anywhere. And they don't really bother you, and we don't really want to bother them. Sean was a little bit apprehensive when I asked him if I should bring a gun with me over to Kodiak, and he sort of suggested that we not do that, but I think he didn't realize that we were pretty experienced around bears, and I was fairly comfortable carrying a firearm and knowing when I should use it. Unfortunately, most people that aren't familiar with bears and carry firearms have no idea when to use it. Brown bears will commonly do a bluff charge, and if you don't know how to read that, you're going to shoot that bear out there at 100 yards, in defense of life and property, and it was just a bluff charge. So Sean prefers that his clients don't bring firearms, and then he's got a weapon he carries with him. So if you're going on a guided trip, I would just defer to your guide and let them handle the hardware, and you spend your time fishing. Alright, here's our classic stringer of reds waiting to load in the cooler. And of course we had to pose for the shot. I think you're allowed 6 fish a day per fisherman, and so it took me a while to limit out. Tom beat me again, I guess. Beat me at my own game, I don't know. But anyway, that was our stringer of reds that we finished up with, and we're just getting ready to load up and head out. There I was out there trying to get one more. I think I was 1 fish short of a limit. No big deal, but we had a great time down there. We're just getting ready to load up and head back. And just here's a shot on the trail. The trail's pretty rugged. You'll see a couple pictures here coming up. Kodiak does have bison, and they're pretty much all privately owned by ranchers on the island. But they get loose and they wander off into places where they're not supposed to be, and so there's some issues with the bison down there. Some of the farmers or the ranchers down there do allow people to come out and hunt these bison. I don't know if I would consider it much of a hunt more than a shoot so much, but it would be an interesting trophy. And so if you're looking for a bison, and especially if you want some really good quality meat, you can't beat getting one on Kodiak Island. They're very well fed, and you can see the population is fairly healthy down there. Alright, here's some shots from the trail on the way back. I don't think I'd want to try to ride or drive a highway vehicle on this trail. In fact, I don't think it would even be possible. It's all overgrown and washed out. It's just a mess. Alright, we finally made it out to the road system, and because Tom had military ID, we drove over to the Coast Guard station, and they have a great fish processing facility that we wanted to check out that's available to people with military ID, either active duty or retired. And Tom's retired Marine Corps, so we were able to get on the base there. And this is the fish processing area, and it's very well set up, very clean. We were able to get in there and fillet all of our reds. And when we got done with that, we took them all over to the fish processing company that we used earlier, and we just had them flash freeze it for us, and it was all ready to go at the end of the trip. Really nice setup here. They have a macerator, and that's just a device that chops up the fish waste, and it's towards the foreground of the picture. You can't see it in this picture. We'll see it later on, but it chops up the fish waste and spews it back out into the bay through a pipeline. And so you don't even have to worry about that, and it goes right back out into the ocean where it belongs. So it's a really good setup, and then they've got the cleaning equipment and everything there, so you can clean the place up really nice. We did the whole area. We gave it a really good wash down before we got out of there. Tom and I both have the philosophy of leaving things a little bit better than they were when we got there. Day 4 was an interesting trip. We started out at Kodiak City, and we had a rental car, so we wanted to do a road trip, and the longest part of the road system is heading south out of Kodiak down to Pasagchak River. You can see on the map there the road goes up to the north as well, but we didn't go up there. We ended up going south down to Pasagchak, and we're going to take a look at some pictures of that coming up. The drive from Kodiak City to Pasagchak River is about 2 hours, if I remember right. And this is just a shot taken on the road. We're going to look at some of the rivers that we came across on our way down there and point some things out about those. Alright, this is the Buskin River, and I mentioned earlier this river is right by the airport, so you could walk to this river from the airport. But you can see it's pretty overgrown, and that's a little bit problematic if you're on a river that's likely to have brown bears patrolling for salmon. So I think if I was going to fish the Buskin, I would probably want to do all my fishing from standing in the water. I don't want to go through the brush over there. You might run across a big brown furry creature of some kind that's isn't fond of being surprised at close range. So you want to stay in the river and do your fishing there. Keep your fish with you. Wear a backpack with all your supplies in it so you're not leaving anything laying around that might attract a bear. But really good run of sockeye that comes up this river. Classic clearwater fishing. Be a great place to take your family. And then this is the Russian River, and we crossed over this bridge on the way down to Pasagchak. You can see they've got their bear sign out there. Just be aware. The bears could be pretty much anywhere on this island. You just don't know where you're going to find them. We were there fairly early in the summer, right when the salmon runs were all really getting started. And so we didn't see a lot of bears on the river, although we did see tracks here and there. But later in the season, when you've got a lot more salmon carcasses in the rivers, you can expect to find brown bears right on the river where you're fishing. This is a shot downriver from the bridge, and these guys are fishing for pinks and silvers. We saw a family down there playing around and some individuals. The nice thing about a lot of these rivers is they've got turnouts that are set up where you could actually go down in there away from the river a little bit and park off the road. If you had a camper, you're in a bear-proof container right there, so you could sleep overnight in your camper and not have to worry about anything. Of course, if you bring a tent and it's made out of ripstop nylon, you probably don't have to worry then either, right? Well, okay, maybe not. But anyway, you can sleep in your tin can, and then you can come down in the morning and fish for silvers and pinks, or if the reds are in, or later in the year, of course, the silvers. And I don't know if you can tell, but right below where I'm standing when I took this picture, right at the bottom edge of the picture, you can actually see a number of pinks down there in the water. There was quite a few of them in there, and pretty impressive how clear the water was on these rivers. Alright, this is the American River, and it has an enhancement run of kings in it. And we went in there and took a few pictures. Everybody told us the water levels on all the roadside streams was really low that year. And I can't imagine what it would be like to try to fish this river if the water was up over that gravel bar, which it normally would be. You're going to be climbing through the alders with your fishing rod, hoping not to find a bear, and then trying to find a way to fish. So, I don't know, but I guess people do it. Here's a couple of kings in a deep pool right under the highway bridge. And because the water was so low and clear, these fish were really spooked. I don't think we could have even caught these fish at all. If you're going to go after fish like this in these kind of conditions, you've got to go in there real early in the morning when the sun's not on the water. Maybe use eggs or something like that. And after a few passes, those fish are going to get line shy and they're going to spook anyway. But you might be able to pull some out. We did see some fairly large king salmon carcasses in these rivers, so obviously people were catching kings. This is over on the Olds River. I didn't take a picture of the bridge on the highway there, but we walked up the Olds, we walked upriver about a mile or two, I think. But the water was so clear that the fish were all spooked. And here you can see it was fairly shallow. You could just about cross it anywhere you wanted. But we did find some really nice deep pools. In fact, in this pool right here, starting where that overhanging tree was, there was a few kings laying in there. But they were so spooked because of the clear water and the very bright ambient light that there was no way we were going to catch them. Every one of these pools, by the way, was just loaded with Dolly Varden. So, in fact, you'd throw your line in there, and as soon as the sinker hit the water, they would spook. So, pretty tough way to try to fish that. But if we were fly fishing, you might have a chance. Alright, now we're down to Lake Rose Teed, and that's just about at the end of the road system. Pretty close anyway. And now we're kind of coming down into the brackish water area just before the Pasagchak dumps into the ocean. And that lighter colored water that you see out there, that's all sand. That's a sandy bottom, and you can actually see fish swimming through there sometimes. There was a Department of Fish and Game contract employee down here manning the weir, and they keep that weir in there so they can count the silvers coming up the river. And there were quite a few silvers below the weir, so we had the GoPro camera on an extension pole, and I asked the guy if he minded we went down in there and filmed the fish for a little bit. So we went down in there, but the footage wasn't all that great. We might throw some on the video here, I don't know, but the fish were really spooked and didn't want to hang around with that camera in the way. And just a scenery shot down by Pasagchak. Absolutely beautiful day when we were down there. And here we are down at the state recreation site. You can actually camp down there. And we saw some people camped out in their campers and stuff. This guy is just walking up the river trying to sight cast for silvers and reds coming up through the Pasagchak. We're right at tidewater. In fact, in the background you can see the tide line where it's been coming up at a really high tide. Of course, all that gravel would be underwater. And here's the main parking area. You can see the foreground here. This guy's brought a little camper over there, and that was a really nice setup. They've got a canoe on the top so they can fish any of the lakes that they come to, and just basically poke around on Kodiak Island and have a great time. And here we are down here fishing at the mouth of the Pasagchac River. That guy in the distance there, he's standing right where that wave's breaking. About 3 feet in front of him, the water's about 15 feet deep. There's a deep channel right there that's all scoured out of the sand. You could see the silvers jumping out in the ocean as they were coming in, and then a big school of them would come right through that cut where that guy's standing, and that's what he was doing. He's trying to catch those silvers. And here's Tom out here trying to figure out how to catch a silver or a red. I don't remember if we caught anything down here. Really the trick on the Pasagchac is to be there on the incoming tide, and that's when the fish generally come in, especially if the water's really low like this. And so we did see a number of fish come through, but I don't remember whether we caught any or not. So at this point we kind of wound it all up and drove a little bit farther south. We wanted to go all the way to the end of the road system, but we found an area with a really nice view. We snapped a few pictures and headed back. And here we are heading back to Pasagchac. You can see there on that sand spit over there, a lot of people out there with their campers, kids running around, bonfires on the beach. Just a great way to spend a sunny summer afternoon in Alaska. And Kodiak does have a fairly robust logging industry, and so I saw this pile of logs. We don't see a lot of this in south central Alaska. I spent my younger years down in Oregon, and logging's real popular down there, of course. So I just had to take a picture of the logging outfit. Pretty interesting. And here's some of the scenery on the way back from Kodiak Island. I would imagine if you sat there long enough with a spotting scope, you'd probably see brown bears crawling around up on those hills, and definitely deer. And just another scenery shot on the way back to Kodiak. Okay, on day 5, we took a really interesting little trip. We wanted to get back out on the saltwater again, and one of the guys in our forum community, his name is Abel. He goes by Abel. His name's John Abel, but he goes by Abel. Anyway, he's a member of the Coast Guard, and he's stationed down there in Kodiak. He's got a 25-foot Carolina. It's an absolutely beautiful boat, totally set up for fishing. At the time we were down there, he was not a licensed charter operator, but he said he'd take us out just for fun, and so we ended up spending the day with Abel down there. And I just talked to him on the phone today, and apparently he is getting set up as a charter captain. In fact, he's just waiting for his paperwork, then he's going to get his logbooks, and he's going to hang out his shingles. So if you're interested in fishing with Captain Abel, the name of his company is Blaze and Abel Charters. His dog's name is Blaze, and so it's Blaze and then an N and then Abel, A-B-E-L, Blaze and Abel Charters. We'll have his contact information on the end of the video here if you want to look him up, but just a great guy. And we specifically told him we wanted to target lingcod because we wanted to get some good underwater footage with the GoPro cameras. And then we also wanted to go for kings. He loves to fish for kings, and he's got them kind of dialed in. So anyway, we wanted to go out and spend a day with somebody else, do something a little bit different. So we went out with Captain Abel. And we took off out of the Coast Guard station, and we went around Chiniak Point almost all the way down to Narrow Cape, which is down towards the bottom where that island is. We thought we were going to end up in Pasagchac the way it was looking. But anyway, we came down, made the corner, and then we went out into some deeper water there. It was really flat that day, nice and sunny. And we did some trolling for a while. I don't have it all marked on the map here, but we did some trolling for kings and silvers. We did catch some pinks. Abel calls them pinkies, but we let all the pinkies go. And we kept whatever kings we caught. I think we might have caught a couple. And then definitely some silvers too. Then after that we went out and picked on the lingcod, and that was an absolute blast. We caught a lot of lingcod out there, and then some more black rockfish as well, and you'll see some pictures of those. After that we just kind of made the loop and then headed back to the harbor there. Okay, this is the first thing in the morning on day 5, and we're heading out of the Coast Guard harbor area with Captain Abel. And this is my friend Tom taking a picture of the sunrise coming up in the distance there. And these are some of the rocks on the way out to the fishing area. I always like areas like this because I've dove places like this in Alaska and also in Oregon, and I know what it looks like underwater down there. There's a tremendous amount of sea life around these kind of areas, and I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't a lot of black rockfish around here. And here we are out here trolling for kings, and you can see Abel on the left there. He's involved with the Wounded Warrior Project. In fact, a bunch of those guys come out to Kodiak every year, and he takes them out on his boat, and they go out fishing and stuff like that, and really nice service for the troops. So I really appreciate his efforts to help those guys out. Meanwhile, here's Tom battling with something, and black rockfish. Pretty nice one too. We would troll for kings and we'd run into these black rockfish, and I remembered from my diving days, sometimes you'd run into those black rockfish hanging in mid-depth. So if you trolled through a school of those, you're gonna hook them up on your trolling gear. So we caught a number of black rockfish that way, and this guy ended up in the fish box, I'm sure. And here's Abel with his buddy on the back of the boat there, probably just jigging up rockfish. And we got some dusky shearwaters here, and some seagulls kind of hanging out for a free handout off the back of the boat. Beautiful sunny day. Here's that crippled herring lure we were talking about earlier. We caught tons of rockfish on these. This is a blue and silver. I don't think it really matters what color you use, but it's got that straight shanked siwash hook on the bottom, so when you drop it down to the bottom, you want to be real careful that you reel it up about 4 or 5 cranks real quickly so you don't get hung up. With that wide of a gap, it'd be really easy to get hung up on the rocks. You wouldn't get it loose. So those rockfish will stay suspended up off the bottom quite a ways, and they see that jig moving around up there, they're going to come up and grab it. Here was a nice little lingcod that we ended up throwing back, but we caught quite a few of these guys, and you can see the beautiful color on that fish. It was just amazing. And here's some of the terminal gear for rockfish. Pretty much anything you see there will work for rockfish, and you can even troll a lot of these lures for kings. And there's another small lingcod that we threw over the side. You can see that jig in Tom's hand there. That's another one of those white rubber tail jigs. That's the other style that I was talking about before that has the thinner tails on it. And after a few rockfish, they're going to bite those tails right off. You're not going to have much of a jig left. This was a pretty nice lingcod that we pulled up. I ended up throwing that guy over the side too, but really nice healthy lingcod population out there on Kodiak. And these are fish that, if you can find lingcod on the menu in a restaurant, it's generally pretty expensive. So it's a real treat to be able to go out and catch your own, and they're really good eating fish. Speaking of eating fish, this guy obviously is perfectly up to the task. We've caught lingcod out of Seward that had whole silvers in their belly, and we're talking a 12 to 15 pound silver right down the hatch there. So they'll eat just about anything that swims in front of them. In fact, many times you'll catch a lingcod, you'll bring it up to the surface, and they'll have another one hanging on to it or following it. And if you're quick on the gaff, you can grab that one too, I guess. This was another charter boat that was out there trolling for kings. No, they're anchored up. They were fishing for rockfish or halibut or something. Not much current running at that phase of the tide, so you were able to stay on the bottom pretty easily. Most of the places that we anchored up, we didn't have too much trouble holding bottom with a normal amount of weight. Compared to Cook Inlet, I fished in Cook Inlet where you're fishing with humongous amounts of lead just to stay on the bottom because the tide rips through there so fast. And here's just a good look at our contents of our fish box, just a little bit, kind of a detail of one of the lings in there. And this is a screenshot off the GoPro camera. We got this guy coming in on the camera, and a pretty interesting shot. We'll have that on the video. And another colored lingcod. You can see this guy's been down in some real brownish kelp, and he's just kind of colored himself up to match. So they definitely dress for success when they're down there. Whatever the background is, they're going to match it. And I guess like any good predator, that's what you'd expect. And we finally pulled the hook and we're heading back into the harbor. You can see really not any wind to speak of. No whitecaps at all, just a beautiful sunny day. And there's a peek in the fish box. We did pretty well on lings and really nice black rockfish too. And here's our trophy shot. That's Captain Abel on the left and his buddy there on the right. I think he was visiting from somewhere in the lower 48. And then there's our black rockfish on the bottom there with some more lingcod. And there's Tom and I holding up our catch of the day. And so what we did after that was we headed over to the Coast Guard shack where the fish cleaning area is. And this is a real good shot of the inside of the building there. You can see both sides of it. In the middle where those guys are kind of gathered around that square area, right behind them there's a pipe that goes down and grinds up your fish, and you just poke it down in there with a wooden mallet and it'll grind up and go right out into the bay. They've got these wheelbarrows there, and you just run it down to the boat, you load your fish in there and drag it right up there. You can rinse them all off and fillet your fish right there. I don't have a picture of the other half of this operation, but if you load up into your vehicle, after you get your fish cut up and ready to go, you just throw them in the cooler, and then across the street and down the way, so to speak, there's another building with some large commercial vacuum packing machines there, and you can vacuum pack your own fish right there for a very reasonable price. They use the same commercial grade vacuum pack bags that the commercial guys were using, but the nice thing about this stuff is you can do it all yourself at a fraction of the price. So we vacuum packed all of our fish, and this was our last day fishing on Kodiak. We left for home the next day. So we vacuum packed all that fish. We took it back to the hotel, and they had a large chest freezer, so we were able to freeze all of our fish. Right? No, it was an upright, which is even better because then the fish isn't all stacked on top of each other. If you do that with your fish, by the way, the stuff in the middle won't freeze. So you want to rotate your fish in your freezer, otherwise it'll rot in the middle. Anyway, we loaded all of our fish in the hotel freezer, and the next morning it was nice and solid. We went over to the processor and got all of our boxed up fish. We hauled our frozen fresh in the cooler, and the rest of it was all boxed up. We shipped it all back to Anchorage. When we got back to town, we just popped it in the freezer and we were done with it. All in all, it was a great trip, and I think you'd really enjoy it down there. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what to do if you are going to go to Kodiak, or if you're interested in going to Kodiak to do a similar trip. Just some basic stuff to keep in mind here. First of all, of course, you want to make advance reservations. The trick is how far in advance. And my recommendation would be, if you're going to go with somebody like Captain Abel, and you're going to book them for more than one day, you definitely want to make your reservations probably in November or December at least, the year before. You just don't want to lose that prime slot. It's possible to book them later in the year, but I don't like to leave things like that to chance. And if you're putting all your eggs in the Kodiak basket, you want to make sure that you get everything nailed down. And of course that also includes your airline and your lodging arrangements if you're going to stay in a local hotel. If you go down there during peak season and you try to do a walk up to a hotel, you might not get a room at all. So you're going to be sleeping in your car or something else. So definitely get your reservations out there ahead of time. If you don't know who to call, go on our website, go to outdoorsdirectory.com and look in our directory. That's the whole reason why the directory is there. So you can look up businesses by name or by location. And you can go in there and just do a search for Kodiak. You'll pull up all kinds of references in there for Kodiak, and you can plan your trip right there from the directory. Number two, expect bad weather. We went down there with all of our foul weather gear, and we were fortunate that we didn't have to use it most of the days we were down there. I think we only had one day when it rained, and that was the ATV day, so we were geared up for that. And then the last day we were there, another storm system came in, but we were already done. We were heading to the airport. So you want to expect bad weather, and that means you have to have the right gear for bad weather. Bad weather means rain and wind, and possibly low temperatures. And then finally, whenever I go to a small town like this, I like to buy locally. And what that means is, if you're going to go out and camp out of a camper down there or anything like that, you probably want to buy your groceries in the local grocery store. There's no sense hauling it all the way over from Anchorage. The prices are almost as good in Kodiak as you're going to get in Anchorage anyway, and they have everything you're going to need right there. So unless there's something very specialized that you need, you can buy it all locally right there in Kodiak. And the folks in town really appreciate it because you're helping to support their economy. So buy local if you can. Alright, some things to bring on your trip to Kodiak. We're not going to have a detailed gear list on here because we have that in our gear list section on Outdoors Directory already. But I want to hit some highlights for you just to reinforce a few things. First of all, bring good rain gear. I use Helly Hansen Impertech. Grundens is also another good brand. Those are probably the two top brands that I would recommend. If you have something else, as long as it's waterproof, but don't go out and buy a cheap vinyl rain suit unless you're just going out for one day, because that will rip the first time you sit down. You'll blow the crotch out on it or something like that, and then your rain gear is no good. Definitely bring a good pair of rubber boots. I wear extra toughs whenever I go out on a charter boat, and even if it's not raining and it's a beautiful day like this, I'm wearing extra toughs because water gets splashed into the boat. Somebody will get the hose out and they'll hose out the back deck and they forget you're standing there. Your shoes get soaked. Now you've got wet feet all day. So wear some rubber boots on the boat, something that's got a good grip sole that's not going to slip on the deck or anything like that, and you'll be in good shape. Also a baseball cap to keep the sun off your face, especially on a sunny day like this. You can get burnt pretty bad, so that ball cap's real handy. And obviously warm clothing. You can bring a little day pack with you if you're on a charter boat, and you can throw that up in the V-berth when you come on board. But definitely bring a warm jacket and maybe a sweater. I even throw in a set of thermal underwear just in case. You just never know what's going to happen when you get out there. And sometimes it's worthwhile to jump up in that V-berth and put on your long handles in case it starts blowing and raining. Definitely a pair of polarized sunglasses, especially if you're doing any underwater filming with a GoPro camera. Being able to cut through that glare and see that fish at depth, it will add to a lot to your enjoyment of the trip too. You can see your fish down there as it's coming in. It's kind of cool. But if you're using the GoPro camera, being able to see where the fish is really important, to be able to get the camera in front of them and know exactly where everything's at. We didn't do so well on that with our GoPros. It was an experiment. It's the first time we used them offshore. And we have a lot of frames where the fish's tail is in the picture, or its head, or its belly, or whatever. You're just kind of pointing and hoping. But the polarized glasses really make a difference. And then of course, if you want to bring your own rods and terminal gear, I haven't found a charter captain yet that said no to that stuff. I think they'd rather that you broke your own rod or snagged your own lures on the bottom and busted them off than his. So if you have your own gear that you prefer to bring, by all means talk to your charter captain ahead of time and ask him if that'd be all right, and then bring it on board. And then coolers, I kind of have a question mark on that. If you're going to use commercial services like we did for most of our stuff, you don't really need a cooler because all your fish is going to be boxed up and frozen anyway. But on our last day, we didn't have an opportunity to get it over to the processors for flash freezing, and so we ended up putting it in our own cooler, and it worked out just fine. If you are going to ship a cooler home, I recommend that you bring some 2-inch wide packing tape and wrap that tape around the cooler on the narrow side. You know, just go around it about 4 or 5 times and make 2 strips of that, so one towards the front and one towards the back, and then or towards the left and the right, I guess, and then go across the cooler lengthwise and go all the way around. Every time you go around that cooler, make about 4 or 5 passes of tape. Make it nice and thick. I don't like to use duct tape for that because the duct tape will rip fairly easily in transit, so that the wide packing tape, that plastic tape, works really well for that. Another thing you could do is you could use a cam buckle strap or some kind of a ratchet strap, but keep in mind that unless you go through the handle openings, that ratchet strap can pull off of there in transit and then you lose your strap. So you might want to go from handle to handle. Igloo makes a really nice cooler that lets you strap through the handles, but I don't recommend that you try that on the Coleman coolers going through the handles. You want to go under the handle with your strap. If you go through the handles, you're just strapping the handles together and you can break them off, or somebody else can in transit, and then you end up with a couple of handles with a strap on it and no cooler. So, and even in those cases, I still tape around the rim of the cooler to keep it from coming open in transit. So just a few tips on packing your cooler, but good idea to bring one. Probably if I was going down there for a one-day trip, I'd probably bring a 100-quart cooler. That's just about right to carry all your fish. You could bring a couple of 48-quart coolers, leave them in your vehicle, and then when you come in at the end of the day, you can split your fish up into a couple of 50-pound packages, which is perfect for the airlines. So that's another idea. You could also bring a small cooler for your lunch and your soft drinks and stuff like that, and then you just throw that in the cabin of the boat. That works out pretty well.